Aaron is just a normal individual that has built a tech company. We are looking for people who are hungry, who really wants to succeed in life. At the end of the day, it's about hiring the right people that actually fits your mold. We're actually down to the person's hunger, efficacy, effectiveness, resource, or what we call gumption. You need to find people that's like-minded, hungry, and so that they will stay hungry.
Hi, I'm Cheryl from Alpha JWC Ventures, your host for today's Frankly Speaking. In all our episodes, we will be talking to founders, innovators, and thought leaders in the startup scene. And today's episode, we will be interviewing Aaron Tan, the CEO and co-founder of Carro. Thanks for coming today, Aaron. As I mentioned just now earlier, right, I've never seen you in person, although I've been with Alpha for 3.5 years. So when you walk through the door, you're very unassuming. You know, you're walking with a t-shirt, pants. Not sure if anyone could see, but you're wearing your flip-flops, right? So-called sandals. And I was reading your story also. I realized you're quite different. You're 13 years old. You started your own business using your grandmother's name. And then at 16 years old, you did the same thing. You started your own business, sold them off by the time you're 21. And then you went to JC, but against all odds in those time, you dropped out to go to poly. So you're also a bit of a rebel, entrepreneur, unassuming. I just want to start off, who is Aaron?
Aaron is just a normal individual that has built a tech company. You know, oftentimes the reporters always report saying that I registered that company under my grandmother's name. But actually the main reason why it was registered under my grandmother's name was because my mom didn't trust what I was doing. She says, what the hell? You know, what is this internet company you're trying to build? And you know, she didn't want to assume liability as a director / shareholder, right? So she felt that actually the better person would be her mom, which is my grandmother. And that was really what happened. So my grandmother then became the scapegoat, so to speak, and the founding CEO and director of that particular company. The reason why that was even registered was simply because I was trying to sell the first company, right? So at a point in time, the buyer came and then they say, hey, you know, I want to buy the company. She asked me, what's the registered entity on Accra and stuff, to which I said, no, I didn't have any. They said, oh, don't you need a company to make all these payments and stuff like that? No, I think so far, you know, they've been paying directly to me and all that stuff like that. So anyway, long story short, it then quickly became a company, and then that was how my grandmother's name got involved with this. But along the ways, you know, I was very clear to myself that I like computer science, I like tech, because I started building, you know, working on programming since I was 13. And it was very, very clear. And that also sort of guided the decision to leave junior college, right? As you may or may not know, but as Singaporean, if I stay another 2 years in JC, that basically implies to me that I have to go for Chinese lessons, which at that point in time, I felt that wasn't the right thing to do. So I felt that a better use of my time would be actually just full on going into a school that can allow me to learn more on programming and stuff. And the side add-on is that I have a little bit more time to run my company. I have to stress that it is not a good thing to switch out of school or drop out of schools and stuff and whatnot. I personally do not encourage that. I'm on the board of trustees of SUSS, right? So Singapore University of Social Science. And that's the last thing I would encourage any students to do. I mean, of course, there are a lot of success cases, so to speak, right? Like Steve Jobs and whatnot, that they have dropped out of, you know, good schools and effectively became successful. But I would say that it's highly, 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 highly improbable, right, from that standpoint. So it's still better to just, you know, go for a good education and stuff and whatnot. And it's honestly also less about education. It's really a lot more about the networks and the friends that you make along the way. But who is Aaron, right? From that standpoint, I would say really just an unassuming person that has built a tech unicorn in Singapore. That's basically it.
This was in the 90s when you did all of that, where I think in Singapore culture, we all know that for you to tell your mom or grandmother, right, that you want to do this instead of, hey, you're just going to secondary school, focus on your PSLE or focus on your O-levels, you were thinking beyond. At the age of 13, I don't know what Accra was, right? So in a way, you were thinking way beyond your age and what people around you were doing. And then obviously, it seems like you were very sure what you wanted to do since you were young. How has that shaped your path of your journey towards basically, you know, like going to Carnegie and then meeting your co-founders and then also starting Carro with Patricia and Kelvin?
One of the best things that happened in my life really was the time when I entered national service. So just prior to that, or actually just during that period of time, I just won national skills, right? And subsequently world skills, which was, I was third in the world for web programming, right? That basically caught the attention of some people, and that helped me quite a bit. And more importantly, that actually gotten me my scholarship, right? As a result of that, I ended up in Carnegie Mellon. I met my co-founders, Aditya, Kelvin, and that really was what transpired during those period of time.
Basically, how did your journey, since you were 13 and all the milestones that you've had, led you towards Carro, to that journey towards Carro?
Oh, yes, correct. So, and subsequent to meeting Kelvin and Aditya, obviously we were spending a lot of time in the US, and we were buying a lot of cars. In those days, when you want to buy cars, because all of us were foreign students, right? And a lot of them, didn't have the requisite license. They all had an international license, but they found it harder to buy a car, right? For whatever reasons, because, first year in, you don't have enough time in the country and stuff like that. I think there was a record of about 10 cars under my name, right?
Wow.
That was really what happened. And subsequent to which, obviously, I became very apt at buying vehicles in the United States, right? So you found out things like Kelley Blue Book, found out things like Carfax, which are, tools and services that doesn't exist in Singapore, and super interesting from that standpoint. We always thought that this is very, very cool, right? From that perspective. And fast forward, we all ended up back in Singapore, serve our respective bonds and stuff like that. So 5 years in to the bond, I was basically saying, hey, our time with the government has ended, right? In that sense. And what should we be doing next? I spoke with Aditya first, and then, Aditya subsequently agreed, hey, maybe we should do something. Okay, and then I went back and thought about what should we be doing? Should we do something in properties, cars, I don't know, marketplace, e-commerce at that point in time? In the end, we decided that actually doing something like a Carro makes a lot of sense, because there's a total lack of transparency, number one. Number two, there's a lot of interest from my standpoint, or from Aditya's standpoint, in vehicles itself, given, again, like I said, the track record of buying all those vehicles in the United States, right? And the lack of innovative services, right? At that point in time, there were only a classified locally and stuff. So there wasn't a transaction marketplace. There was no vehicle information systems. There was no auction systems and stuff, whatnot in this part of the world broadly. So we decided to bring that back into Southeast Asia, and that was really what transpired the whole thing, and that was how Carro started.
It's an untold story that you actually had 10 cars registered under your name. All the liability.
That's true. Frankly speaking, it's true.
You said yes to all the requests from your friends and your classmates.
Yeah. I did it all for no money, So literally they would just buy, they would buy a car for 10,000, it's 10,000. I collect nothing in between. To me, it's just, I'm just helping a fellow Singaporean, right, from that standpoint, when I was at CMU. And that's how I built all these relationships with all these people at CMU.
Oh, I'd love to have a friend like you in uni.
Oh, that's the regular they paid for it, right? It's just my name that they borrowed.
A lot of people might have said no, because it's like, oh, what if something happens?
Liability. You don't think so much. You were like 20 years old. It's like, oh, what's the worst case that can happen, right?
True,
But no,
true. So you spoke a bit about, innovation, why you guys started Carro, what's missing in Southeast Asia, right? So I know, and I've also been, I've used now the app and the website and all, and you guys have actually been at the forefront of trying to integrate a lot of AI, algorithm-driven and AI-driven kind of functions for consumers. Can you dive in a little bit more, or just share a bit more on how a lot of these innovations, right, are here to really enhance the experience and differentiate Carro from your competitors? Because as much as Carro is still around, we know there's still the old school way of, buying and selling cars. My current car I bought 3.5 years ago. I did it the old school way, actually. It's still the whole classifieds, or call it used car agent and such.
We use AI in many facets of the trade, right? So a lot of it is at the inspection side of stuff, right? Whereby we use computer vision to tell us, hey, are there issues? Are there signs of accidents, right? So in the past, we focus a lot on scratches, to the end that, at the end of the day, or we could be very accurate in scratches, like 95, 96, 97% accuracy of scratches. To which we realized that actually, scratches itself is not costly to fix, right? So subsequent to which we then move forward to ask ourselves, how do we actually use computer vision to detect accidents or signs of accidents, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to mean scratches.
Yep.
It could mean misalignment, it could mean differences in contrast of colors and stuff and whatnot. And that we subsequently found to be more effective and more useful from that standpoint, if that makes sense to you. So a lot of the AI in computer vision is to detect accidents based on pictures and oftentimes videos, right? Second part of AI that we use a lot is sound, right? So the other issue is, other than externalities of the cars, right? So the alignment and colors and stuff and whatnot, scratches in this case. Actually, what's more important and more costly from a payload standpoint is actually the engine, the gearbox. And those things are way more useful. And the only way we could tell, of course, the traditional way is just plug an OBD detector into it. But half the time, the seller can actually reset those things and those messages go away, right? So oftentimes, especially if you operate in places like, say, Indonesia and Thailand, right, whereby flood or cars are prone to flood, it's actually very hard to detect it just purely on OBD side of things. Of course, you would imagine that, hey, the inspectors, the mechanics will be able to listen, right, and put that as the baseline of whether or not they think that this car is an issue. But the truth is, if you operate in an emerging market far flung away, like say Pak Chong in Thailand or Semarang, right, or far away from Jakarta, how do you ensure quality of service? How do you ensure that the inspector actually does his work properly, right? Let alone bribery and things like that. Let's put that aside. But just doing his work perfectly and not skiving, or actually just marking the job as done, but actually didn't even turn on the engine, right, as he inspected the vehicle. So we felt that the best way to do this is let the AI do it, right? So it's mandatory. Every time that we take a car in, we have to listen to the engine of the vehicle, the AI. So the app that the inspector uses, which is built by ourselves internally, listens to the engine and asks, and the AI predicts whether or not this car has an issue, right?
Oh, wow.
Just purely listening to the engine of the vehicle. Of course, you might ask, but EVs, there's no engine. Well, the good thing is, the EVs itself, they all emit electromagnetic signals or waves in that sense. And what we are doing is nothing more than just listening to the sound waves that comes out of this and determining whether or not this car, the engine in this case, has any issues. And we will do the same with batteries, for instance, right? Or the underlying issues with the EVs itself. Ultimately, EV penetration in our part of the world is still relatively low, right? So whatever that we have done is still very relevant and super useful, right, from that standpoint. So the second thing that we do for AI, the third thing I would say is a lot of pricing and prediction of prices to sell and buy and things. Last thing I would say is that of late, we are doing a lot of AI around AI agents, right? Especially with generative AI. A lot of what we do really is that we build our own internal CRM to be extremely powerful, right? We are able to communicate with the customers on calls, SMS, emails, WhatsApp, Messenger, Line, what you have not, all in a single CRM that we have built internally. Now we then built an AI agent on top of this, and the AI agent today is able to communicate back and forth with the customers ourselves. This is not exactly a chatbot, right? So if you've tried chatbots before, it's very dumb, right?
Yeah, it is.
You have to go through a particular scenario and you have to go by a particular
It's very linear in its thought
extremely
process,
linear, right? But the Gen AI side of stuff is different. It's literally a human agent in that sense. And that is going to change our business even further. That basically means that, hey, you know what? My inspection costs can come down today already with AI. But moving forward, my customer service costs, my sales costs can all come down progressively. And so as a result, we think that AI itself, while it has already played a big part in Carro's success to date, but I think it will play an even more critical role for us moving forward.
I'm very fascinated by the sound AI one. It's almost like, guitar where you tune to find out whether it's the right pitch. You tune your guitar or the piano, right? So I assume this is like a tuner for cars.
The truth is that we do look at the frequencies, right? So in tune guitars and stuff, you're just listening to the various frequencies like A, B, C, D, E kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the same for vehicles, right? But except that in this case, we are listening to the frequencies, but we are detecting patterns. Say for instance, knocking, right? Sometimes engine knocking could mean belt is loose, it could mean something is wrong with the car. Sometimes when the engine frequency is lower, so i.e. not, it's not exactly loud, you realize that it could be due to flood, right, for instance, and things like that. So we are looking for patterns. Whereas when it comes to tuning, you're actually looking at the frequency range in that sense. You're not exactly looking for patterns, but it's similar.
When you're talking, right, I'm visualizing myself sending my car into you guys. Like, can you just, it's like a doctor. Like, is there something about like a pacemaker, something about the engine of my car not beating right, and things like that. I know you do that for your current fleet of cars. Would you ever consider like all this technology that you've created, AI technology, it would also be something that even though I may not have bought a car from you guys, but hey, it's like me sending my car for servicing, but I've been to, I think it's Sinmin Automat, right? I mean, like the kind of work that they do, I think obviously it's not as tech driven as you guys. Is this something you would be open to opening up to?
No, we have already opened up, right? So for us, we give or sell or whatever our technology to other bigger players, like say, like for instance Mitsubishi, for instance Jardine C and Jardine Second Carriage, these are all our big partners. Our investors also include like Sime Darby, right? And DRB Highcom. Those are all extremely big players and extremely, good supportive investors that we have that we always look up to. And I have to say that, we whenever we do something, especially in tech and AI, we always discuss what we can do with all these, so to speak, big boss.
Okay.
Right? I just came back from Malaysia and I was just with Tan Sri. Anyway, we were talking about exactly how we can use AI more together with DRB, right? In that sense. And that's been a very fruitful meeting. And yeah, today we already do that.
A lot of this sound very high tech. They sound amazing. They sound very high tech. But when it comes to convincing your consumers or target market, say, hey, we listen to the sound of your engine. We have this computer vision technology that can not just obviously pick up the obvious scratches and things like that. It's also when something gets misaligned. How much of this information is really communicated to the consumer? And because there's some people like, sure not AI, which, it's that also that a bit of a pessimism around, is this really AI, or do you really give them a full walkthrough and explanation how things are done? How do you convince them?
Frankly speaking, the customers don't care, right?
Oh.
So it depends on the target group of customers in that sense, right? From a company standpoint, there's two. There's many, but broadly two: investors and their customers, right? So the investor side of stuff will learn, appreciate, and love things like this, right?
Yeah.
Because to them, these are like cost drivers. So you can actually push your costs down or in fact, push your revenues up, depending on how you look at it, right? But AI can help with both revenue enhancement and cost reduction. That's the investor's perspective. So that's where we talk more about AI and things like that.
Yeah.
To be very frank, customers, as they walk in, very, very simple. Is this car quality good? Is this car price something that I'm okay with?
Yeah.
Can I afford to pay this with installment? That's basically the three things that really matters, right? From that standpoint. So the customers, as they walk in, we don't go and tell them, say, don't worry, these cars are AI, check and stuff like that. They really don't give two hoots about this. To them, they care about pricing, they care about quality of the vehicles, they care about the assurance that we give them as Carro. Oh, you said that there's a 5-year, 3-year, 2-year engine gearbox warranty. Is that true? How does that work, right? So those things are things that they care, and that's the things that we emphasize to the customers. But again, if you look at the customers as investors, then of course AI is more important. But you're right. We don't really actually try to convince them that we have the best AI tool, and as a result, you should buy from us. Most people really don't care.
Some people care, or at least Singaporeans, is that Carro is like a darling brand of Singapore. Like PM Lee even mentioned, right? Singapore-born company, so-called unicorn and stuff and things like that, right? And people see only the result. The true measure of a person or a company is not what you have achieved, but actually what you have overcome. And I know during the COVID period, it was very tough for you guys, right? So what are some of the big challenges that you have gone through? Aside to COVID, I've seen some of the stories there, but I know also that you've previously mentioned in some other interviews that when you expand into different markets, people will gang up like against Carro.
Yeah.
Can you just share a bit more on some of these challenges, interesting stories, right? That to reach this unicorn status, it's not all bed of roses, basically.
There were so many instances whereby there were collusion, there were like government-related issues. Setting up a company in Indonesia or even in Thailand, by the way, it's not exactly easy because our trade is sort of a restricted trade in a lot of these countries. Those are exact details that needs to be worked out, and that wasn't easy as a startup coming in, right? To be very honest, I will share one. I think there's more like in Singapore's context what happened, right? So when we first started back in the 2016 or so, one day I gotten a love letter from a large media conglomerate, and that love letter basically entails the details of how some of our interns copied some thumbnails, and I stress thumbnails, 100 by 100 pixels kind of pictures of workshops across Singapore. Okay, so this was a project that I don't know why, but we did, and then our interns went around taking pictures of the workshops.
Yep.
But somehow there were a few, like maybe I can't remember how many, quite a few of these workshops that they have found pictures of thumbnail from this particular media company.
Yep.
To which the letter entails, oh, you have infringed our artistry, basically violated copyright, right? Because you copied my thumbnails, and then our lawyers, being a big firm as well, went back with a very strong legal letter saying that, hey, you know what, this is nonsense. There's nothing artistic about this workshops of pictures of workshops, right? I mean, pictures of workshops. I don't know what's so artistic about that. But so it went on and on. The lawyers were making a lot of money, right? So that's where I learned also. I mean, while the lawyers are sometimes your friends, in this case, they were my friends. So they acted very aggressively against the so to speak, the media conglomerate, which were not used to this, right? So then it became a lawsuit, right? And it ran all the way to writ of summon. Don't know whether you've seen something like this, right? So basically a thick stack of dogs will say that, I'm going to sue you, right? And that hamstrung us for a year, honestly, right? So if I remember correctly, Alpha JWC was already an investor, because I think those days you guys were one of our earliest shareholders. Yes, correct. You guys were early investors in us.
Yeah.
At the point in time when we were scaling, fighting off all these classifieds and things like that, people were just, assuming that we were classifieds. And we said that, hey, we are not classifieds, but people, the investors or the media company just have the assumption that we are a classified and we are competing with them for dominance, which is not true. 2 years later, in the end, they pick up the phone one day and called me and say, okay, you know what, we're going to settle out of court. Let's not do this anymore. We'll be good friends from now onwards, right? And stuff like that. So subsequent to which that they kept their promise and their bargain and stuff like that. Today, we continue to advertise on that classified, so to speak. They don't own it anymore, right? But that was basically one of the biggest things that happened to us early days, right? 2016, 2017 itself. And that effectively hamstrung a company. So whenever a company that is coming up, that's in the media sector, that's tech, this particular media conglomerate will tend to like to sue them for whatever reasons, right? So this happened to, my good friend's company, Hungry Go-Ware, and a few others. So they told me that this is not new. They have seen this before many times. There's the same tactic over and over again. But that's the kind of things that you have to deal with, right? Sometimes incumbents, especially big incumbents that want to stay dominant, they do all kinds of things to make sure that the company do not ever grow big. And that was basically one of the episodes that we almost died in that sense. So they literally was just forcing us down with all these lawyers, right? Because saying that, you can, how much lawyers can you afford? You have raised like at that point in time $a few million, right? $3-4 million, I think. I'll let you burn, right? And then slowly burn over time. No investors will dare to invest.
Basically, see who outlasts each other.
Yeah, exactly, right? But we were very lucky, to be very frank. I think at that point in time, John Riady, through Ventura, right? With the family of Lippo, they actually came in twice, right? And during the time when I was being hammered by the conglomerate, the media conglomerate, actually Lippo came in on the second time, right? So for now $2.5 million, which was very useful at that point in time. And that really tied us through and got us to where we are today. So today, we're still very thankful for for John and the fund, Stefan, for making the right decisions.
Were there at any point then, right, when things were getting so tough, maybe that 2016 incident or saga, did you ever think about giving up, you guys? At which point you just like, you know what, we just really gotta power through, even if it costs us an arm and a leg, and
That never ever occurred to me. It's always about, how do I deal with this situation, right? There's this situation right now. How do I best, resolve this situation in the least costly manner? And to that end, I have very good friends and who have been very good counsels on exactly what I should do to fix certain things, right? So that really hasn't crossed my mind ever for the worst scenario in that sense. I always think about what is the best way to overcome certain things, right? I give an example would be my recent transaction with Jardine CNC, right? Second Carriage. Again, that deal almost went under, right? In that sense, that almost didn't happen. For me, when the news came to me from the bosses there saying, hey, you know what, we're not going to do the deal anymore, it was actually quite, I won't say devastating, but it was quite a big blow, right, from my standpoint, because everything was okay, and then, something didn't happen for whatever reasons. But I received the call the following day. I caught the bosses at JCC, right? And then, they were nice enough to take that call. And then very quickly we came up with a plan, and within a few months later, we closed the deal. Right. So, I'm quite persistent, right? And I do not take no for an answer. Subsequently I spoke with the Jardine Second Carriage folks, the senior management there, and they said that the thing that they were most admired about Carro in that sense is our grit, right? So, we don't really take no for an answer, right? So think of ways to resolve their issues. And subsequently that came true. And to be honest, that was one of the best decisions that I've made. If we didn't do the deal, then the company would have been quite different today, right? In that sense. And they have been extremely good partners. I cannot complain about that.
When I first joined Alpha JWC, right, I was just chatting with Chandra about different founders. And then Carro came up. So I said, hey, Chan, so how is Aaron like, or Aditya or Calvin? How's Carro like, right? Because it's one portfolio company I've never got a chance to work with. And then he shared with me, he said, oh, great company. And you have to meet Aaron. He's very charismatic. right? It's like you cannot, and it's funny, just now you said that you will not take no for an answer, because Chandra also said that you're charismatic, you're a very smart guy who will
He
not
probably
take
said I'm
no.
stubborn. No.
Well, maybe along that line, because he said he will not take no for an answer, right? So it's funny that you said that and he said that. That's how he actually described you, right? Charismatic, very intelligent, and will not take no for an answer, right? So with that, then that's your personality. And as just now at the beginning of this podcast, I was asking you, who is Aaron, right? So how does that, maybe yourself and also Kelvin, Aditya, the three personalities kind of define the culture of Carro? Because you started off as three founders, and the team expanded into different markets also. I think now you have like 4,000 over almost, I don't know what's the last count.
5,000. Almost 5,000.
Almost
people,
5,000 staff, right? How do you have passed on that kind of a DNA of grittiness, intelligence, and even that whole, the softer side, which you may not have explicitly said it, but I see it in the common thread is friendship. Your lawyer friend in uni, that whole relationship thing. How does all of that actually translate in your Carro culture?
Some people will tell you all these stories about how they have this Silicon Valley culture kind of stuff. You can work from home. You have unlimited paternity leave kind of stuff, and they call that the culture of the company. To me, I don't really subscribe to that belief. I personally feel that I always said in previous interviews that I'm like a Chinese tauke, right? I sort of like slave drive everybody in that sense. We subscribe more to the Chinese way and style of working, right? There's like the Chinese will say 996 or 007 nowadays, right? 996 means 996, which basically means 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, right? Kind of stuff. And I think that's the kind of culture that we have in the company. We don't really need everybody to work from office constantly, right? But we do expect that when we have to do work, say for instance we need to do a car show, for instance, or if we need to have a campaign that goes out tomorrow, we expect all hands on deck, even though it's Sunday, right, at 9 p.m. at night and stuff like that. We don't really care from that standpoint. So that's the kind of culture that we want to build, in the sense that everybody feels and loves the company, the brand, right, and try to do its best for that. And how we do it is, of course, we align interests, right, especially for middle management and above. We always give ESOPs and ESOPs that aligns everybody's interests, in the sense that if the company does well, you will do well as an individual and stuff and whatnot. For me, a lot of it is really about ensuring that people are playing like a game. So internally we do a lot of emphasis on gradings, right? So performance reviews and stuff like that. We have to have that. Once a company cross, I would say even a 500 or so mark, you need to have very good performance review systems. You need to have a grading system of sorts, like grade 1, 2, 3, up to 15, for instance, in our case. So that people actually have ability for them to move upwards and look towards something, right? And that's what we believe. At the end of the day, people, when they join you as an individual, do they join you, I want to embrace this 996 culture, kind of work culture? No. They are joining you because they want a way to do better. And that goes back to hiring, right? For us, a lot of it is, we are looking for people who are hungry, who really wants to succeed in life. And I think at the end of the day, it's about hiring the right people that actually fits your mold, right? So if you find people that, on day zero, you feel that this guy is hungry, he wants to prove himself and stuff like that, this is where I have a platform called Carro, and I'm happy to let you prove yourself, right? It doesn't matter how old you are, 20, okay, maybe 19 is a bit too young, but it's quite 20, 21 years old, or you are 51 years old. Yeah. I do not really care, right? I think
you started at 13, so 19 is...
Yeah, so really, the age, gender, qualifications doesn't matter. I always say, people say, you guys are all from good schools. Does it mean that you guys only hire people from elite schools? No, I say, that's not true. I have people who didn't even complete diploma, right? And stuff like that. Does it matter? No. This guy is a GM, for instance. He only has a diploma, right? But do I care about qualifications? No, right? So it's not down to that. It's actually down to the person's hunger, efficacy, effectiveness, resource, right? What we call gumption.
Yeah,
that's way more important, and that is important if you want to drive culture. You need to find people that's like-minded, hungry, and so that they will stay hungry, right? And you align their interest with you by ESOPs and stuff, and that's how we do it.
I think everyone talks about work-life balance, unlimited annual leave, take as when you want, and obviously working hours and all also, right? So it's quite going against the grain.
But that to me is not culture. That's nothing more than just employment benefits, right? Employment, having food every day in office packet to you it's not a culture. I'm sorry, right? At best you can say that it's a valley culture. It's true, but it's not work culture is different.
True.
Yeah.
A bit more forward-looking then. Let's go back then to the business, right? What are your upcoming plans? I know you've talked about it last year, the last 2 years actually, on possible IPO. How's that coming along?
Okay, the IPO hasn't been decided as exactly when it is. Is it imminent? Sorry, I cannot comment on that.
Yep.
But I can tell you and I can say and reaffirm that we have been IPO ready for 4 years now. Why do I say that? Because we have been PCAOB compliant for 4 years now. Soon to be 5 years. Just very, 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 very long. Time flies. And if you ever IPO a company in the US, you just need 3 years, right? In that sense. So we are more than ready from that standpoint, accounting standpoint. We have a lot of folks that are SOX compliance trained, controls.
Yeah.
We have our own legal offices right now, already all set up in that sense. So to be very frank, again, frankly speaking, we are ready from a administration, controls and whatnot standpoint. But I am still waiting for the right time. Because the long and short of this is that I do not want to IPO a business that is, sub less than $3 or $4 billion, to be very frank. Because if you list a business like this, less than $3 billion, and some would argue even less than 5 is too small, which I don't disagree, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
I feel that the company will be lost in noise, especially if you're like sub $1 billion. You'll be lost in the noise, there'll be no coverage, and the chance of the company turning back, moving upwards from there, I won't say zero, but it's very, very low. The probability is less than 1%. My 2 cents on when is the best time on IPOing depends on, number one, the markets, right? The market is hot, maybe we should do it. Number two, it's as simple as whether the company's performance to date or moving forward 12 months, typically when we look at IPO companies, can allow you to hit about a 3 to 4 billion kind of outcome. If the short answer is yes, then I think that's when I'm ready to IPO the business, right? Last year we did about 40 something EBITDA. I think this year, this coming year moving forward, we should be able to do somewhere north of about 70 million EBITDA, give and take about 70 to 80. And then that should be able to drive us towards a 3 to 4 billion outcome, right? Assuming we acquire 1 or 2 more companies along the way, I think we should get to 100 million kind of EBITDA outcome. And that's where I'm going after, right? Which is 100 million US dollars EBITDA outcome in the next 18 months. Now, assuming we do that, honestly, the company should be quite prime position to list at anywhere above 3 to 4 billion.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents on it, basically based on market comps.
Right. So maybe we should keep this podcast. If ever, finally, you do go IPO, we can dig this back out and just say, hey, let's look at numbers. Back then you were saying these are the numbers and such, right? Actually tying back to 13-year-old Aaron, right? So you said you were very entrepreneurial from a very young age, but your mom didn't want you to register a company under her name, right? Because she's like, oh, I'm not really sure you know what you're doing and whether it's successful and all. But now here you are, right? With Carro, you're kind of a success. What would you say then to your younger self, 13-year-old self at that time? Because you've started multiple businesses, right? At that age, like, what would you say to him? Advise him?
I would say buy Bitcoin. When it was like 1 cent or something like that, just keep it for next 10 years. But no, on jokes aside, right? Do something in another trade. Okay. I genuinely believe so, because I feel that the auto trade itself is not a bad sector. I think it's a great $1 trillion sectors and stuff and whatnot. But I do think that there are also other sectors that could be interesting, right? Even things like, auto marketplace is one trade, as I was saying, right? So I think EVs, building up your own EV brand, EV factories and stuff, those will be interesting, right? From that standpoint, I don't know about building satellites, launching to Mars and stuff like that. That's not exactly in line with my interest. Something in property would be cool, right? From that standpoint.
Or chips and semiconductors.
Yeah, so stuff like that. Yeah, chips or semiconductors, NVIDIA, right? So I would have told myself, okay, maybe you don't look into auto marketplace. The outcome is like, a few $1 billion. It's too small, right? What if you built like a Tesla equivalent, right? What if you built like a NVIDIA? Or maybe at that point in time, I should have told myself, buy NVIDIA shares. Yeah, I used a lot of NVIDIA chipsets when I was younger, but for gaming purposes. But anyway, who would have thought that the GPU company would have been the most valuable company in the world?
Very interesting, because I was listening to the podcast this morning on the Quiet, and they were interviewing the Maurice Cheng of TSMC, right? And he was talking about how NVIDIA kind of almost went bankrupt, but they came back up. And I thought, if only then, we all knew.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation, and for also plugging the podcast by saying the show title a few times.
No problem.
Yeah, and hopefully next time we can have you on our podcast again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And that's all for today's episode of Frankly Speaking. Subscribe now to hear more stories on Founder Stories.